right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling, well, actually a listener request. And it's a good one. It's a truly fascinating one. It takes us back to a really pivotal moment in history, the events leading up to and including the Feast at Hongmen.
Yeah, it's a great topic. And for this deep dive, we've got some really, really rich source material to work with. We're going to be primarily drawing from Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian. As many of you know, it's a foundational text. You really can't understand this period without it. And it offers a really compelling narrative. But it also, as we'll see, it presents some intriguing questions and some things to unpack.
Yeah, exactly. And what we really want to understand today is how a seemingly straightforward meeting, right, between two of the really dominant figures of the time, Liu Bang and Zhang Yu, how does that meeting, which seems like it should be so simple, how does it descend into such a tense and potentially lethal situation? And then, taking a step back, what does this really dramatic encounter reveal about the raw power dynamics that were at play in the aftermath of the Qin Dynasty's collapse?
Yeah, I think to really grasp the significance of this event, you need to appreciate the power vacuum that was left by the Qin. So Liu Bang and Xiang Yu, they emerged as the most powerful contenders to fill that vacuum, but their forces were far from equal, right? So Liu Bang, he commanded at the time around 100,000 troops, which is nothing to sneeze at. It's a substantial force. But it paled in comparison to Xiang Yu, who had this massive army, roughly 400,000. So you can see right off the bat, the initial balance of power heavily favored Xiang Yu.
It certainly did. Now, it seems like, logically the expectation would be that whoever sees control of that Qin heartland, the Guangdong region, would be in the commanding position. So surprisingly, it's actually Liu Bang who moves quickly, enters Guangdong, and captures Xianyang, the Qin capital. That's not really the expected outcome. And given that difference in numbers, right, that we just talked about, is Liu Bang's initial success in Guangdong even more surprising than it seems on the surface? Do the sources offer any insights into how he pulled this off?
That's a great point. Yeah, the sources do suggest that Liu Bang employed a combination of factors to achieve this initial victory. Speed was certainly on his side. He moved very quickly, and he seems to have bypassed some of the more heavily defended passes, using strategy there. And there's also a suggestion that he might have had a degree of popular support within Guangdong itself, perhaps due to the harshness of Qin rule. People were ready for a change. But yeah, regardless of the specifics, his unexpected victory definitely caught Xiang Yu off guard, and it really became the catalyst for everything that followed. So you can imagine Xiang Yu hearing this news, and he's already been kind of tipped off by Cao Wusheng, who was actually within Liu Bang's ranks. So this news it fuels his reaction. He moves decisively, mobilizes his huge forces, and encamps at Hongmen, really positioning himself for potential confrontation.
So where's Liu Bang at this point? He's in Bashong, which, considering he kind of bypassed Hanggu Pass, this really strategic pass, instead of fortifying it, that seems pretty exposed, doesn't it? If his intention was to control Guangdong, wouldn't he have wanted to deploy his main forces more strategically?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, was this some kind of genuine oversight? Or was there perhaps a more calculated strategy at play that the sources might not fully reveal?
Yeah, and that is a question that historians continue to debate. Some suggest, maybe Liu Bang underestimated Xiang Yu's reaction, or maybe he prioritized the quick occupation of Shenyang, the capital. And then others theorize that perhaps he just didn't have the resources to both effectively garrison Hangzhou Pass and secure Guangdong, at the same time. But whatever the reason, his position in Bashang really left him in a very precarious situation within striking distance of this much larger force under Xiang Yu.
Yeah. And this is where it gets interesting. Right? We have this location, Xinfen, and of course Hongmen. And these locations actually have this kind of fascinating connection to later Chinese culture. Especially, I think this would be interesting for those of you who are really into Tang Dynasty poetry. But this area near Chengyin was really well known for its wine. And it became like a gathering spot for poets. Yeah. You even see it referenced, for instance, in the poetry of Wang Wei, who mentions, fine wine of Xinfeng. Now, I should clarify here, there was another Xinfeng over in Jianyang, which was also famous for its wine, and even Li Bai mentioned that one. So just to be clear, we're talking about the Xinfeng near Chang'an, which is in modern-day Shenyang. It's just a nice little reminder that these historical events, they unfolded in real places, right? Places that continue to kind of resonate culturally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the physical proximity of Bashang to Hongmen is also quite significant here. We're talking roughly 17 kilometers, or about 40 lies, as they would have measured it back then. So they were practically neighbors. I mean, that really, you can imagine, that just heightened the tension and the urgency of the whole situation.
Definitely. And, while Sima Qian's account of the feast at Hongmen it really is, it's a literary masterpiece, right? It's praised for its vividness. It's important to keep in mind, though, that historians over the years, they've also pointed out some logical inconsistencies within the narrative. So, it's a compelling story, don't get me wrong, but maybe not every detail should be taken as, absolute historical fact.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's true of so many historical accounts. They're compelling, but they're not always perfectly factual.
Right, exactly. So we have this incredibly compelling narrative, but as you might be thinking, you know, things aren't always perfectly neat and tidy in the historical record. And that brings us to the points that historians have raised about, logical inconsistencies within Sima Qian's record.
Right, exactly. And I think a good place to start unpacking some of that is with this really central figure in the whole drama, Shang Bo. So he held the title of Left Minister of Chu, which indicates a high-ranking position, a lot of influence in Zhang Yu's kind of power structure. But crucially, he was also Shang Yu's uncle. So you've got this familial connection there, and it's his existing relationship with Zhang Liang, Liu Bang's key strategist, where the narrative really takes this, another intriguing turn.
Right. So Xiang Go, knowing that Zhang Yu's making these preparations for a potential attack, he actually secretly rides to Liu Bang's camp to warn Zhang Liang. And it seems like his motivation is really focused on saving Zhang Liang, who, as you mentioned, he had this prior connection with. Do the sources hint at any other motivations besides just saving Zhang Liang? Were there perhaps underlying tensions within Zhang Yu's camp that Xiang Bo might have been aware of?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. The primary motivation that's stated in the sources is indeed this past favor that Zhang Liang had done for Xiang Bo. So the story goes that Zhang Liang helped Xiang Bo escape government pursuit after he'd committed a murder. So, that's a pretty strong bond to forge between two people. But as for wider tensions within Xiang Yu's camp, the texts don't really get into explicit details at this stage. But, it's certainly plausible, right? You've got Xiang Yu as this dominant force. It would be pretty surprising if there weren't factions or individuals within his camp who had, differing opinions about how to proceed with Liu Bang. So Xiang Bo's actions could, potentially reflect those kinds of undercurrents.
And Zhang Liang's response really kind of underscores his loyalty to Liu Bang. So despite this very real and present danger, he refuses to abandon his lord. Instead, he feels compelled to inform Liu Bang directly about this impending threat. But here's the thing. How could a strategist, and we know he was renowned as a strategist, how could Zhang Liang have been caught so off guard, so unprepared for this potential conflict, especially after Liu Bang's rapid success? Shouldn't he have anticipated Xiang Yu's reaction?
Yeah, it's a valid point. It does seem somewhat out of character for Zhang Liang, given his reputation. Perhaps the swiftness of Liu Bang's initial victory created a sense of overconfidence. They maybe thought, hey, we pulled this off, we're in a good position. Or maybe they believed that, their initial diplomatic efforts after entering Guangzhou would be sufficient to kind of smooth things over with Xiang Yu. We're here, we're not a threat, let's work together. But it's also possible, and this is something you always keep in mind with historical sources, it's possible that Sima Qian's narrative kind of emphasizes their surprise to heighten the drama, right? To really make Shanbong's intervention seem even more critical and timely.
Yeah, that's a good point about Sima Qian and how he structures his narrative. But going back to Liu Bang, when Zhang Liang tells him what's up, his reaction is described as one of great shock. And he even asks Zhang Liang, almost bewildered, what should we do? So this is Liu Bang, right? He's the one who made the initial decision regarding Hangu Pass, and now he seems totally unprepared for the consequences. He even tries to kind of shift the blame a little bit, saying, the strategy to bypass Hangu Pass, that was some shallow scholar's idea. And he pretty readily admits that his forces, were no match for Zhang Yu's much larger army. So given all this, right, his admission and his shock, it really underscores just how precarious their situation is.
It really does. They're facing overwhelming odds at this point. So Zhang Liang, ever the strategist, he proposes a pretty smart move to leverage the personal connection with Xiang Bo And, Liu Bang, he's always been a pragmatist. He's all about survival, so he agrees to this plan. And he treats Shangbo with a lot of respect. He even addresses him as like an elder brother. And then he goes even further, proposes this marriage alliance. It's a classic way to solidify a relationship and hopefully de-escalate this immediate threat.
Smart. And then Liu Bang makes this really crucial pledge to Jingbo, right? He basically claims that, since entering the pass, I haven't dared to take anything. I've registered officials, I've sealed the treasuries, and I've just been waiting for your arrival, Xiang Yu. And this is actually where the idiom, not to commit the slightest offense, Kia Wu Fan, originates from. Now, of course, the text does kind of hint that this portrayal of, complete restraint, that it might not have been entirely accurate. But strategically, it serves the purpose of projecting this image of non-aggression.
Right.
I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just waiting for you. And he also explains, oh, yeah, the reason we're guarding Hangu Pass, that's just to prevent bandits, not to oppose you directly.
Yeah, very strategic. And, Shingbo seems to be, at least partially convinced by Liu Bang's apparent sincerity. And, of course, he's influenced by that past kindness from Zhang Liang. So he agrees to convey this message to Xiang Yu. And he argues on Liu Bang's behalf, emphasizing his merit in entering Ganzong first and suggesting that, look, attacking him now would be unjust. And remarkably, Xiang Yu is persuaded, at least to some extent. He agrees to treat Liu Bang reasonably. But then Shangbo, he instructs Liu Bang, he says, look, you got to come to Hongmen in person to offer a formal apology. So that sets the stage for this really fateful meeting.
All right, so all the pieces are in place, right? We've got this potentially explosive encounter. And the next morning, Liu Bang arrives at Hongmen, but he comes with a relatively small escort of only about 100 cavalry. And he plays it humble, he's very apologetic, and he basically reiterates the explanation for entering the pass first. And, he blames the tension on, quote, malicious rumors spread by villains.
Classic move. And, Xiang Yu, he'd already been kind of, calmed down a bit by Shangbo, and then Liu Bang shows up all apologetic. So he reveals that Cao Xian was the source of that initial negative information, which is interesting. That little act of transparency suggests that Xiang Yu, at least at this point, might have genuinely wanted to resolve this whole thing peacefully. And to kind of seal the deal, he invites Liu Bang to stay for a drink. Seems like a polite gesture, right? But beneath the surface, there's still all this tension and suspicion simmering.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's actually during this banquet that the atmosphere takes this really peculiar turn. So Sima Qian, he records this in detail, the seating arrangement becomes this point of real historical discussion. So we got Xiang Yu and Shangbo seated facing east, Fan Zhang facing south, Liu Bang facing north, and then Zhang Liang is standing facing west, apparently serving. Now, I know this might seem like a small detail, but you can really see how even the seating could hold all sorts of potential meaning.
Oh, absolutely. You got to remember, in ancient China, seating arrangements, they were full of social and political significance. Sitting facing east, that typically signified the honored guest, or someone holding a position of authority. So Zhang Yu, occupying that position, you could interpret it in a couple of ways. Maybe it's a display of arrogance. I'm Zhang Yu, I'm the big dog here, and I'm going to sit in the seat of honor. But it could also be a tacit acknowledgement of Liu Bang's recent control of Guanzhong. So he's treating him almost like the host within that territory, but a host who's now in a subordinate position. The whole thing's really ambiguous, which just highlights how fragile and distrustful this relationship was. Every gesture could be interpreted as a power play or even a slight.
I mean, it's amazing how much we could draw from just the seating arrangement, but it also raises some questions, right? Like, why was Fan Zhang, this highly respected elder statesman, key advisor to Xiang Yu, why is he facing south? And then, Zhang Liang, he's facing west, which is traditionally the host position, but he's described as a server. So what's going on there?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And those very inconsistencies, they've fueled centuries of scholarly debate. So some scholars in later dynasties, they argued that, no, facing east was definitively the most prestigious position. And that reinforces this idea of Xiang Yu's dominance. But others, like Yan Ruzhu, a Qin Dynasty scholar, he proposed that Sima Qian deliberately detailed this unusual arrangement to foreshadow the dramatic events that were going to come, specifically Shang Zhuang's planned sword dance, which we'll get to in a minute. And then it gets even more interesting because Sima Guang, in his comprehensive historical work, Comprehensive Mirror for Aid in Government, he actually chooses to completely omit this detailed seating arrangement, probably because of all this confusion and the varying interpretations it generated.
So we've got this really weird, unclear seating arrangement.
And then it's during this banquet that the tension just skyrockets, and it's all because of the sword dance. So Fenzing, he's super distrustful of Liu Bang, right? He sees this as a prime opportunity, so he repeatedly signals to Xiang Yu, take him out, do it now. He even raises his jade pendant, like in this really suggestive manner. But Xiang Yu, and we can only speculate why, he hesitates. He pretends not to notice these like really urgent cues.
It's interesting, isn't it? And Fenzeng gets so frustrated by Xiang Yu's inaction that he takes matters into his own hands. So he instructs Xiang Yu's cousin, Xiang Zuam, to offer a toast to Liu Bang, and then, under the guise of entertainment, propose a sword dance, which is really intended as a pretext for an assassination attempt. And Xiang Yu, very reluctantly, grants permission for this whole performance to go down.
So Liu Bang's in trouble. But luckily for him, Xianbo, he steps in. He's loyal to Zhang Liang, right? And he's now pledged his goodwill to Liu Bang. So he draws his sword, joins the dance, and he really strategically positions himself to protect Liu Bang from Zhang Zuang. So you can imagine it's this really tense, improvised ballet, right?
Yeah.
But with swords. And it's all this political maneuvering playing out, right there in front of everyone.
It's a crazy scene. And amidst all this, life or death drama, Fan Zheng's frustration, it just boils over. He pointedly addresses Xiang Yu as king rather than his current title, general or supreme commander. It's a small change, but it really hints at this growing expectation, at least in Fan Zheng's mind, that Xiang Yu is destined for greater things, maybe even to replace King Kuai of Chu. And that ambition, whether it was openly discussed or just something Fan Zheng sensed, it probably fueled his urgency to eliminate any potential rivals, like Liu Bang.
Wow, so we've got this really dangerous situation. And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, in bursts Fan Kuai. So Zhang Liang, realizing what's going on, he slips away to inform Fan Kuai about the danger. And without any hesitation, Fan Kuai, he's described as Liu Bang's valiant charioteer, he just decides, nope, I'm going in there to protect my lord. And you can imagine everyone's probably pretty shocked by this sudden burst of, loyalty in action.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic entrance. So Sima Kun, he describes Fan Kuai, he forcefully pushes past the guards with his shield, bursts into the tent, throws aside the curtain, and he just stands there, hair standing on end, eyes glaring at Xiang Yu. It's a powerful image. It really shows his unwavering loyalty and courage. And it's interesting because, remember how we were talking about the comprehensive mirror for aid in government? Well, they omitted the seating arrangement, right? So they also modified this description of Fan Kuai's stance, and they removed the mention of him facing west because that detail didn't align anymore with their version of the narrative.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these little changes and omissions can kind of ripple through the whole story. But back to Fan Kuai, he's this imposing figure. And Xian Yu's reaction is pretty surprising. He basically says, who is this guest? He's kind of playing it cool, but then he learns it's Fan Kuai, and he actually acknowledges him as a brave warrior. And then what does he do? He offers him a huge goblet of wine and a raw pig shoulder. I mean, it's such a bizarre gesture, but it's really memorable.
It is. And Fan Kuai doesn't even blink. He thanks Xiang Yu, drinks the entire goblet of wine in one go, and then I love this. He puts his shield on the ground, puts the raw pig's shoulder on top of it, draws his sword, cuts off chunks, and just starts eating. This scene is so wild that it actually gave rise to the idiom, a goblet of wine and a pig's shoulder. Jingzi Jian, which to this day is used to describe someone who is heroic and uninhibited. It even shows up in a later Shai poem by Xin Qiji.
So Fan Kuai is fueled by this wine and raw pork, and he launches into this really powerful speech. And he doesn't hold back at all. He basically draws this parallel between the cruelty of the fallen Qin Dynasty and what Xiang Yu might be about to do, this potential injustice of harming Liu Bang. He reminds Xiang Yu of King Kuai's decree that whoever entered Jiangyang first would be made king of that region. And he points out, look, Liu Bang, he fulfilled the agreement, but he hasn't received any reward. And now you're listening to these slanderous accusations. You're considering harming someone who's clearly shown merit.
Yeah, it's a powerful moment. And even though, Shango and Liu Bang had made similar arguments coming from Fan Kuai, this fierce and imposing figure, it carries a different kind of weight. He really drives home the legitimacy of Liu Bang's position, and he emphasizes the injustice of what Xiang Yu might be about to do. And what's interesting is that Xiang Yu doesn't really offer a counter-argument. He just says, all right, Fan Kuai, take a seat.
So we have this lull in the action. And Liu Bang, he seizes the moment. He senses an opportunity to escape. So he gets up, pretends he needs to use the toilet, and then he signals to Fan Kuai to join him outside. And this is where I'm thinking, dude, this seems incredibly risky. He's just navigated this crazy, volatile situation Why push his luck? Why risk angering Xiang Yu by just like abruptly leaving?
Yeah, it does seem like a bold move, but the historical accounts actually give us a little more context here. So, records of the Grand Historian mentions that Xiang Yu, he notices that Liu Bang's been gone for a while, so he actually sends Chen Ping to urge him to come back to the party. And it's this little nudge from Chen Ping that leads Liu Bang to discuss his next move with Fan Kuai outside. So he recognizes that the danger's not over, despite this apparent truce, and he decides that getting back to the safety of his camp in Bashang, that's the priority. He doesn't want to risk another attempt on his life.
Makes sense. And then we get Fan Kuai's response, and it's perfect. He says, they are the butcher's knife and chopping board, and we are the fish and meat. Why bother to say goodbye? It's so decisive, right? That line, it's the origin of the idiom ren wei daoes wadeku yu ro, which perfectly captures how precarious their situation was. And his advice is crystal clear. Escape now.
And that's exactly what they do. Liu Bang, he just abandons his carriage, his horses, everything. He takes off on horseback, makes a beeline back to Bashang. And Fan Kuai, along with 4 other loyal followers, they take off on foot, but they take a secret route, more direct, under Lishan Mountain. And to buy themselves some time, they even leave behind the rest of Liu Bang's men, like over 100 of them, as a decoy. It's a pretty desperate move.
So what about Zhang Liang? He's left behind to deal with the fallout. And as instructed, he waits until Liu Bang's probably back at his camp, which is about 20 lines, so roughly 8 kilometers away. Then he goes back to the banquet and offers apologies to Xiang Yu and presents those promised gifts, a pair of white jade discs for Xiang Yu and a pair of jade cups for Fan Zhang.
You know, the timeline here, it does raise some questions. I mean, 8 kilometers, especially on foot, that's not a quick trip. So Xiang Yu and Fan Zhang must have been waiting for quite a while for Zhang Liang to come back. And when he finally does, he tells Xiang Yu that Liu Bang got totally drunk, classic excuse, and was afraid of getting in trouble for leaving without properly saying goodbye, so he just went back to his camp.
And Xiang Yu buys it, or at least he doesn't make a fuss. He accepts the jade discs without much of a reaction. But Fan Zhang, he's not having it. He is furious. He throws the jade cups on the ground, shatters them with his sword, and he says, alas, this kid, talking about Xiang Yu, is not worth planning with. The one who will seize the empire, it's going to be Liu Bang. We will all become his captives.
I mean, it's this incredible outburst, right? And Fan Zhang's prediction about Liu Bang's eventual success, it's almost prophetic. And it's interesting, the historical texts actually connect this quote to a later reflection by Ruanzhi, centuries later, where he's looking back at these battlefields and he's lamenting the lack of true heroes in his own time. And he kind of implies that maybe even these figures from the Chuhan contention, maybe they weren't as grand as they were remembered.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how history gets rewritten over time. But what happens next? Liu Bang gets back to his camp, and what's the first thing he does? He executes Cao Wushan, the guy who initially betrayed him by informing Xiang Yu about his entry into Guanzhong. Pretty ruthless, but I guess that's the kind of move you have to make when you're fighting for survival.
Definitely. It shows Liu Bang's, pragmatic and ruthless side. But, stepping back and looking at this whole narrative, this feast at Hongmen, it's this really dramatic and influential event. But it's also full of these enduring mysteries and inconsistencies. Even something as basic as how they address each other, the honorifics and titles they use in these conversations, it's all kind of chaotic and doesn't quite match up with what we know about those conventions. It really suggests that the story might have been shaped by later understandings of the power dynamics, how things actually played out during the Chuhan contention.
So basically, the later rivalry and the eventual establishment of the Han Dynasty might have colored how this earlier meeting was portrayed.
Exactly. But I think at its core, the feast at Hongmen, it was probably primarily about establishing this clear relationship of subordination. Liu Bang, by going there, by apologizing, offering gifts, he's acknowledging Xiang Yu's power in this new post-Qin world, at least for now.
Right, he's playing the game. And it seems like Xiang Yu's main focus was on consolidating his own control over the fragmented empire and dealing with other rivals like Tianrong and the Qi state. He wasn't ready to go to war with Liu Bang just yet. And maybe Fan Zhang's suspicions about Liu Bang's ambition, his whole idea of this imperial aura, maybe that was added later to kind of explain why he was so desperate to get rid of him.
Yeah, it's possible. And it's really interesting because, the biographies of Fan, Li, Tang, and Guan, which is within Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, it offers a slightly different perspective on the events, and it really highlights Fan Kuai as the main hero of the day. So in this version, Fan Kuai hears about the danger independently, and he, bravely forces his way into the banquet all on his own, and we get this much more detailed and vivid description of him eating that raw pork, directly confronting Xiang Yu and criticizing him. And this account attributes the information to Fan Kuai's grandson, Fan Tuguang, which, could mean there's a little bit of family bias creeping in there. It's just interesting that we don't have a comparable counter-narrative from, say, Zhang Liang's descendants.
Yeah, for sure. It just highlights the complexities of historical sources and how individual perspectives, even within the same work, can really shape how we understand what happened. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the feast at Hongmen, we've seen this dramatic clash of personalities and ambitions. We've got political intrigue, personal bravery, all these moments of incredible tension. But we've also seen how the historical record itself, it's not this, perfect objective source. It's got its own uncertainties and these conflicting interpretations.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads to this really important question for our listeners. Considering all these different accounts and the inconsistencies, how much of our understanding of history is actually shaped by the perspectives and potential biases of the people who wrote it down? What might the feast at Hongmen have really been like without all the dramatic flair that's been added over time?
It's a great question to ponder. And if you want to explore this whole period and these fascinating characters further, we really encourage you to check out Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian for yourself. Learn more about Liu Bang, Xiang Yu, Zhang Liang, Fan Kuai, Shang Bro, Fan Zhang, all these players in this incredible drama. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.